14 years after Sidney Crosby beats the U.S. in the Olympics in overtime, it is again Canada's best player that wins it for Canada in overtime. So, same result, but here's why I think it's a very different story as we put a bow on the Four Nations, look ahead to the Olympics, and talk some Sabres-Rangers as the Sabres get back to work this weekend. Coming up on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome in, and thanks for making this Friday edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast your first listen, and thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free, and wherever you get your podcasts, you can check us out on YouTube as well, where you can like and subscribe the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Sneaky Joe DiBiase coming to you, and we have a pregame show in a way. We'll talk a little bit about the Sabres and the Rangers a little bit later on. Practice lines, who might be in the lineup, who might be out of the lineup. And that goes for both teams because the Rangers have guys that were at the Four Nations, and whether they play or not is a little bit of a question as well. So there's a lot to get to on today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast, but it is going to be a lot about putting a bow on the Four Nations face-off that was a smashing success by the NHL. A lot to say on that. Roster building and whatnot, too, on today's episode of the show. You can hit us up if you would like to on our Locked On Sabres text club. To sign up for that, join subtext.com/Locked On Sabres. You can also follow us on Twitter at Locked On Sabres. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Sneaky. 3-2, the final. Canada goes to Boston. They take the U.S. to overtime after the U.S. won in the preliminary round, and they win the gold. And there was gold. Gold medals. Didn't know that. Were presented to all the players after the game. There was the trophy that they hoisted. Pretty cool picture. Crosby with all the Canadians behind him, and then the fireworks, whatever, behind him. So they had the festivities after the game. It was a super entertaining hockey game. I went out for it. A lot of people went out for it. I was at a place that would have been closed, but they stayed open for it because people wanted to watch this hockey game and were very plugged in, very dialed into it. So on all accounts, this was an amazing idea by the NHL. It absolutely paid off. It totally worked, and it has set the foundation for hopefully a decade of international best-on-best hockey that is on the way. After a decade of absolutely nothing on the international scene other than your world championships once a year that usually features the C squads of each team. You know, no offense to Dylan Cousins, but Dylan Cousins on Team Canada and, you know, guys like that being in the world championships. The world championships is what it is. It's, you know, it's there. It's always over in Europe, which also matters to this. They care about it a lot, so they do deserve that tournament. But it's just not the same. So we haven't really had it for 9 years. And I think the next 9 to 10 years, we're going to get next year the Olympics. And I would imagine the Olympics after that, we are going to get World Cups of hockey every 2 years, which is a huge, huge deal, in my opinion, to kind of keep this going. I kind of hope, I don't know what they're going to do in 2027, because so 2026 Olympics in Milan, 2028 will be the first World Cup of hockey that they kind of do in this run. 2027 is TBD, and maybe you think they just plug an all-star game in there. I kind of hope, I don't even know if I need a Four Nations. I think a 3-game series between Team USA and Team Canada would suffice in place of that. By the way, the next Winter Olympics after the Milan Olympics is going to be in France, which I think means the NHL will go back. Typically, they'll go if it's in Europe or if it's North America. If it's in Asia, we saw with Beijing, we saw with South Korea, they did not want to go there, time zone differences and whatnot. So France, I think they would go also. That's in 2030. And then in 2034, it's back in Salt Lake City. And I mean, there is 0% chance the NHL players are not there. So between now and 2034, 26 Olympics, 28 World Cup, 2030 Olympics, right? 2032 World Cup, and 2034 Olympics. I think you're getting at a minimum 5 best-on-best tournaments. And maybe, like I said, if they do another 4 nations mixed in there, if they want to do a US-Canada series mixed in there, maybe you could throw that up to 6 or 7. I think you're getting a minimum 5 tournaments, though, in the next 9 years, which, again, compared to 0 in the last 9 years, is awesome. And I think this tournament being a success is what is going to make sure that happens, because they saw it. They saw how it worked. Now, in terms of the game itself, it was a very tight game. It was very reminiscent of a Stanley Cup playoff game. You know, it was tight. Guys didn't want to take a lot of chances as the game kind of got late and late. You had some guys that you might not expect to contribute scoring the goals, right? Jake Sanderson scores for Team USA, who was like the 6th defenseman in the lineup. You had Sam Bennett, who's a 4th liner for Canada, scoring a goal in this thing. Like, you had those contributors down the lineup. But I do have a point to get to about roster decision-making, but whatever. It was tight. It goes to overtime, and you just... It reminded me a little bit of Bills and Chiefs, you know, where you've got, by most accounts, the second best guy. Allen this year was better, but over like a 5-year period, I mean, like, Mahomes is seen as the greatest quarterback in the world, and you're maybe seen as having the second best quarterback in the world. And when you have the second best guy, you might feel like, oh, I got it. I'm that close. I'm always that close. And I thought about that a little bit last night in overtime, where Austin Matthews has not 1, not 2, but 3 glorious scoring opportunities, one of which I think he absolutely should have scored. He got set up in front of the net. He's got to lift it over the blocker of Binnington, and I think it was there for him, and he just didn't do it. The other 2, Binnington just made absolutely incredible saves. He was unbelievable in that overtime, and he deserves a round of applause. Like, I don't think the apology forms and whatnot, I'm standing on my morals with him that I don't believe anybody was wrong about Jordan Binnington. We knew what Jordan Binnington was. He is a guy that can allow a lot of soft goals, and sometimes that could be at inopportune times. And he's also a guy that could stand on his head in the biggest moment. You have no idea what you're going to get. That's Jordan Binnington to a T. So, okay, he stood on his head. That was part of the story. That was part of the prediction. Hellebuck, meanwhile, more steady, more consistently great. I don't think anybody was wrong about the goalie matchup. It's just you ran into hot Binnington in overtime. You got the Stanley Cup winning level of Binnington, not the, one of the worst starting goalies in the league, Binnington. And that stinks. It wasn't just those Matthews saves, by the way. Brady Tkachuk on the doorstep gets robbed. And, okay, so your superstar gets his chances, doesn't bury him. Their superstar gets his chances. He does. And I didn't think McDavid was even that great in the game or even in the tournament. But he's the best player in the world. He's the best player in the world. And the difference sometimes between the best player in the world or the second best and third best players in the world, like, sometimes it's actually, there is a gap there. And there's a little bit of evidence of that in this one. So they still got the best guy. Canada still got the best guy. So it stings. It hurt to see the U.S. lose this. I've been waiting years to see this matchup. I said this in the cold open that a lot of comparisons made to Sidney Crosby scoring the golden goal to win the Olympics in 2010, scoring on Ryan Miller. Like, oh, nothing's changed. 14 years later, you took them to overtime, and their best player ended it. Yes, that is the same. This is why I think the story, though, of this tournament is very different than that tournament in the past, and why I do I take a moral victory. You know, the title of the show up here in the corner, not silver and gold, silver and moral gold. I think there is a moral gold here for the U.S. I believe that all the predictions that the U.S. had caught Canada in this sport were proven true. If you look at the score on aggregate, these two teams played twice in this tournament, and take away the empty net goal by the U.S. And what was the score? 4-4, right? 4-4. Take away the empty net goal. If you want to count it, the U.S. actually won, but I don't need to count it. In the two games that these two teams played, it was a tie game. Last night, 5-on-5. Everything's exactly the same. These two teams, I mean, I'm doing that because one team had a power play and the other didn't. So a little imbalance there. But, you know, shot attempts were exactly the same in this game. Shots in these two games between these two teams, almost exactly the same. Puck possession, almost exactly the same. Like everything right down the line is like even. These two teams played each other even. There was not much separating the two. And for me, that's all the proof I need. I got the proof I need in this tournament as an American hockey fan that they are on the same level now. So no, they did not win the gold. They did not win the trophy. That stings. That stinks. But one of the things that this tournament was about, other than winning it, which was number one, the other thing this tournament was about to me was the U.S. proving they have put themselves on the same tier as Canada. And I don't know how you could have watched those two games and think that that wasn't proven. I think it absolutely was. I don't think anybody's saying that it wasn't. Canada, too. Like, they're saying it. Yeah, we got a fight on our hands now every tournament going forward. And that's what's different about the 2010 Olympics. As much as that was a great run, and Ryan Miller being MVP is like an all-time great, week or two of being a hockey fan, that U.S. team in 2010 was nothing close to Canada. They got there with an elite goaltender, making amazing saves and grinding it out, blocking shots. Look at all the numbers from those matchups. It wasn't close. One team was definitely better than the other. Sometimes in hockey, a lesser team can keep it close against a better team. That is what the story was 14 years ago. That is not what the story was last night. The story last night was those two teams were the same, and it was going to come down to just who buried their chance. And, if you want to say Canada still gets the slight edge because they have the best player in the world and the U.S. doesn't, all right. Today's not the day to really argue that, I guess. When we come back, as I say, it's a marginal gap between the two now. It's almost the same. It is the same. In the margins, the U.S. failed. In the margins, they failed. And I'll explain why when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, before we get back to the Sabres as they play the Rangers tomorrow night. Sneaky Joe DiBiase here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the games tip off or face off, the NBA and the NHL action just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you could place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you could stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I will have a little bit later on for tomorrow's game. If you are looking for some action for these, for these Sabre games down the stretch, they're not going to be very meaningful in the standings. A lot of different things you can look at. Sabres are on the puck line, an underdog, slight against the Rangers in this game tomorrow. If you're feeling good about a certain individual and you want to bet them to score a goal, that's always fun. You could, if you want to go long shot, hat trick is another one that you could do as well. Someone to score a hat trick. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Sabres and Rangers tomorrow. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But I do have one more point that I want to make on this tournament and Team USA before we kind of leave it back, for what it is. And then, we already talked about the Olympics a lot. A couple of Sabres that will be there that weren't at this tournament. JJ Peterka for Germany. They will be participating. Yuri Kulik for Czechia will be participating. It would be stunning if he didn't. I think he'll probably be one of their top two centermen. You'll get Dahlin for Sweden, and I think you're going to get Tage Thompson for Team USA. He spoke more about that today, that is his goal. He wants to play for Team USA next year, and I think that's going to happen. And Tage is only part of this point and part of this complaint that I've maintained throughout this tournament, going all the way back to when the U.S. selected their roster in the late fall, early winter. And last night in the championship game, I think their bottom end roster decisions really hurt them. They faced injuries throughout this tournament. Can't control that, right? I get it. But if you listen to me enough, what was my number one complaint about the U.S. in hockey at this tournament and in the past? I tweeted this out. It actually went a little bit viral. A lot of people picked up on it. Not everybody liked it. A lot of people did, but a lot of people wanted to fight against it too. I tweeted out after the game last night. It's my number one takeaway about this hockey program, that Team USA has only one issue to overcome, and it is the same issue that they have been plagued by since 1980. That they think the, quote, right players, as Herb Brooks said in the movie, right, and carried that out in action, obviously, well before the movie, that they think the right players are better than the best players. And my whole thought, all I want to scream at Team USA, Bill Guerin, and the whole organization right now, USA Hockey, is stop watching movies and just bring your best guys. That's it. Don't overthink it, because they did. They thought, hey, we're going to be stuck in our own end when it's the bottom of our lineup, and we're going to need some gritty guys. We're going to need some defensive guys. So let's bring Vinny Trocheck, and let's bring Chris Kreider, and let's bring Brock Nelson. Those are really the big three for this. And part of that is politics, right? Chris Drury, involved in USA Hockey, he brought his Rangers guys, and his Rangers guys have stunk all year. So that hurts you, but it's still more about, we'll bring the right guys, not the best players. I'll never forget in the 2016 World Cup, leading into that tournament, with Dean Lombardi maybe been the GM of that team, former Kings GM. But again, USA Hockey's been consistent on stuff like this. They're going to a best on best tournament before the season, and they brought Justin Abdelkader over a prime Phil Kessel. Justin Abdelkader, who was like a bottom six guy at that point for the Detroit Red Wings, wasn't good at all. And Kessel was like a 35-plus goal scorer. And they didn't have a lot of offensive talent back then. And we'll leave Kessel home because Abdelkader, man. Oh, that guy, he's tough. And they didn't win a game. I think last night it hurt them. Every time those guys were on the ice, Trocheck, Nelson, Kreider, they got run over by Canada. They couldn't get it out of their own end. All the numbers, shot attempts were way in Canada's favor when those guys were out there. And it's not that hard to figure out. Those guys are not that great anymore. Kreider's had a bad year. Evolving Hockey is a 5th percentile forward. Meanwhile, they leave Kyle Connor out of the lineup. I could make all the points about the guys that weren't even brought there. Tage Thompson, although he was in the building last night, but Thompson not being named to the team, Jason Robertson not being named to the team, Cole Caulfield not being named to the team. There's those guys. Kyle Connor not playing last night is nuts. He's in the 95th percentile for goals above replacement amongst forwards this season. There's just no way you can watch these two players and pick one over the other if you've watched them all year long. It's just the U.S. thinking, again, Kreider, right guy at the right time, big games, right? Playing for the Rangers. Just don't overthink it. Just put the better player on the ice. And Kyle Connor's a better hockey player than Chris Kreider, and it's not even particularly close. But that's the decision they made. And it hurt them. Not only because, bottom of your lineup, you might rather have a guy who's better, who's going to have the puck more, but you ran into an injury. Matthew Tkachuk tried to play and couldn't do it. Didn't play in the second and the third period, or barely played in the second and didn't play at all in the third period or overtime. So Matthew Tkachuk, a guy that's in your top 6, he exits the lineup. And now, my bottom 6 was kind of filled with guys that aren't really that good. So I saw Trocheck get shifts up with Austin Matthews in that third period. Dylan Larkin was the guy that went up there, and that's fine. He was really good. He had a really good tournament, and I thought he looked really good when he did go up there. But it might have been nice if you had Kyle Connor available to you, if you had to move guys up the lineup, because nobody in that fourth line was playing worthy of being moved up the lineup. So for next year, I want to pick out those 3, and on a lesser extent, I want to add in JT Miller, but it's almost a different point. I'm almost upset I added him in the tweet because he's a little bit different. But the 3 guys that, to me, under no circumstance can be on the Olympic team next year, or at least can be in the regular rotation. You'll have bigger rosters. Maybe they're there as extras. Under no circumstance can they open the Olympics next year and have Chris Kreider, Brock Nelson, or Vinny Trocheck in the lineup. No way. All 3 of those guys have got to be out. And if you want to go Tage, Caulfield, Jason Robertson, take Caulfield out if you want, because he can't really play in the bottom 6 as well. And you want to go Kyle Connor to give you both the offense and the defense, I'm fine with that. Those 3 can't be in at all. And I think JT Miller next year, right now, I would want to lean towards not wanting him on the team. He was great last year, 100-point player, and this year he's been all right. He wasn't very good in Vancouver at the start. He's been okay for the Rangers. And I think he was terrible to this tournament, but he's 31 years old, and this has been a down year for him. And I'm wondering about next year at 32, by next February, are we really thinking that he's hit the decline? I think we are going to think that by then. So Miller, I would say, shouldn't be on the team next year. If I was guessing right now, I'm more open to him, though, than those other 3. The other 3, it's like, no way. You cannot have Nelson, Kreider, or Trocheck back. And those were mistakes that I think, again, marginal loss. You're trying to win in the margins, and I think they didn't give themselves the best shot to win in those margins by bringing players at the bottom of their lineup that didn't deserve to be there, with their play at least. When we come back, Sabres and Rangers. Speaking of all those Rangers, Adam Fox, by the way, didn't play very well in this tournament either, and he's had a down year. The Rangers kind of stink this year. That's who the Sabres play tomorrow. We'll talk about the game, the lineup, the odds when we come back here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres is presented by SelectQuote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. Same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. No medical exam required, and it's more affordable than you'd think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right insurance policy for you at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. All right, Sabres are back at it. Another practice for them and a game tomorrow, 5:30 at KeyBank Center for Sabres and Rangers. The Rangers, I would predict, and I haven't seen this confirmed, but I would absolutely predict that you are not going to see JT Miller, Chris Kreider, or Adam Fox in the Rangers lineup tomorrow. I'll double check that real quick right now. I know at the start of the show when I started recording that wasn't known, and I do not see it now. So yeah, I'm going to think right now that they're not playing. We'll see, though. That could be wrong. Some teams do things differently. I know Florida said that Matthew Tkachuk's going to be off for a couple of days, give him a rest. That's a little different because I know he dealt with an injury, but again, we'll see what we get. If they are missing those players, I mean, that's already a thin lineup this year that has not produced. Those are a couple of their best players. I don't think they're as good as they used to be, but I mean, JT Miller, by the way, Miller, Trocheck, Kreider, and Adam Fox. The last time they put a lineup out, Miller was the number 1 center. Trocheck was the number 2 center. Kreider was the third line left wing. Again, man, that's a non-playoff team in the New York Rangers. Chris Kreider's on the third line right now. He was a healthy scratch a month ago, and he was in the lineup for Team USA last night. Unbelievable. And then Adam Fox, who plays the most minutes and is on their number 1 pair. All of those guys. Again, we'll see. Maybe they want to pick 2 of them. Maybe Kreider plays because he only played part of this tournament, and maybe they think he's a little bit more fresh. The Rangers, though, are not having a good year at all. They have been such a letdown. A lot of individual players are having some of their poorest seasons that you've ever seen. Kreider's having like his worst year. I think Fox is having his worst year. Trocheck's having his worst year. Miller just got there, so we'll see. But it's just not good results. Now, they have dug themselves back into the race a little bit. But as of now, they are 3 points back of Detroit for a playoff spot. And they have to climb over Boston and Columbus also to get there. But they're in the race. They're just not having a very good year. -3 goal differential. The Sabres, meanwhile, what they present for this is Tage Thompson back. He was practicing again today. Went to Boston, flew back. He'll be in the lineup tomorrow night. No doubt about it. Darlene Jokiharju back at practice as well. So full lineup except for Beck Malenstein, who actually, he was back at practice. So maybe we get Malenstein too. Malenstein, Lafferty, and Benson, Zach Benson, were all rotating on the 4th line. And I don't love that because that sounds to me like they're not far away from Benson being a healthy scratch, which to me is insane. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, though. One texter pointed out, this is a good point. You should always look for this about scratches. Benson was practicing on the power play unit. So the fact that Benson was practicing on the number 2 power play unit, I think means that you're going to see him in the lineup. And Luukkonen, you would expect to be in goal for the Sabres. Now, the odds for tomorrow, +106, Sabres on the money line, an ever so slight underdog at home. I'm going to make that my sneaky good bet of the game, actually. I don't think the Rangers are that good. I think the Sabres being at home, and they are the more well-rested team because again, all these Americans that played for the Rangers last night, I think you're going to have a fresher Sabre team than what the Rangers are going to have. So I'm going Sabres +106. The over-under this game, 6.5. Under is -134. Yeah, I like the Sabres to win this hockey game, 5:30 against the New York Rangers. So enjoy the game. If we get a win, then the Sabres would be only 9 points back of a playoff spot. But the whole league is playing tomorrow, so, maybe they'd only be 9 points back until, you get other teams playing a little bit later on in the night. Let's see. Go on a win streak out of this break, and get me to a place, a win for the next month would be, get me to a place where I'm wondering about you being in the playoff race. Not even being in it. Have me thinking about it. That would be a success for the Sabres over the next days and weeks. 7 games, by the way, until the trade deadline. So tomorrow's 1 of 7. 7 games of Jason Zucker, Jordan Greenway, and others until they have to decide if they're going to keep those guys past the deadline, if they're going to try to extend them, or if they are going to sell them off for picks and prospects. But we'll see. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Locked On Sabres podcast and listening throughout all my hullabaloo on international hockey over the years. I'm glad to actually have some games to talk about on that front. And on to the Olympics next year. Tage better be in that tournament. I'll just say that. That'll do it for us on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen. If you would like to make Locked On NHL your second listen, you get all good stuff on the tournament wrapping up. If you want more on the 4 nations, if you want more on the league getting back to action, will there be any carryover in momentum in the NHL from the 4 nations to the NHL with ratings and whatnot? Check out the Locked On NHL podcast, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Get Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk to you this weekend after Sabres and Rangers here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.